We donate a meal for every person who signs up to an American in Need in partnership with Feeding America. We have what's on my mind right now. Well, I'm an entrepreneur, so clearly I have ADD. So I have probably 10 things on my mind. The biggest thing on my mind right now, which is kind of exciting, is that we've been experiencing incredibly fast growth. And now it's a matter of how to scale smart, not just fast. Closing some capital, our second round, really focusing on how we scale the business. We're empirically driven, but also how do we scale impact and really solve the B2C distribution problem for the brands that we work with. So the moment that they get on the platform and sell, it's a game changer for them. And so that's the number one thing on my mind, and there's 10 others we can talk about after.
I'm Sally Madsen from IDEO, and I focus a lot on systems design. So really a lot of the work I've been doing lately is not just the product or service, the core offer that a company is providing, but what are all the systems aspects that make that successful. So whether that's understanding the different stakeholders and how to roll out change through that system, or things like distribution and those other aspects of it. I've been doing a lot of work lately in education, sustainability, and social innovation and emerging markets.
And I'm Brandon Barnett. I'm at Intel. And like Sally, I am thinking about systems. And I'm thinking about the science of systems and how innovation as a science really isn't very mature in the business community, and that there's lots we can do that's bringing systems thinking and understanding not just the stakeholders and the products, but what is the economic system that we, through technology or through social efforts, can catalyze completely new economies of value creation. And how do we do that in a systematic way that provides business opportunity for a host of companies?
All right, thanks everyone. Okay, I'm going to start off with our ADD specialist first here. So you are running a business that clearly takes advantage of technology. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about how that business takes advantage of technology and what you see as some of the up-and-coming technologies that you think will affect the consumer space.
Sure. So the brands that we primarily work with are consumer retail products. It can be anything from the wooden watch that plants a tree down to the shoes made by artisans in Guatemala, really fashion-forward products. And so primarily we're dealing with small and medium-sized social enterprises. And some of their biggest challenges are, how do we get more customers? How do we get more scale? How do we get more reach? How do people find out about us? And so what Roost has done is we've taken a technology approach to solving that problem, saying that we've created one platform that solves the technology and the distribution problem for them. So they come on into Roost, they create their own storefronts, control their own dashboards, manage their own inventory, ship their own products, and we do a revenue and data share with all of our brands. So we invested heavily in technology to allow the technology to do the heavy lifting, so we can focus our time on building audience and community. And so when we email out a new brand, can make a significant impact just by having them in the platform. So we look a lot to technology as kind of our heavy lifter. And when it comes to solving technology for the brands and the social impact community, it's about making it really easy. I think Sally can probably talk to that a little bit with IDEO. Simplicity is so key to taking the scary out of technology. So we created a really simple, well, it's very complex on the back end, but to the brands, it's a very simple, user-friendly, my 85-year-old grandmother could have used it. And really making it a simple solution that doesn't just solve the B2C pain, it actually helps them get better as a business and scale.
What would you get, so if we flash back 10, 15 years, yeah, what was missing back then that is enabling you today? What would you say?
So 10, 15 years ago, a lot of these brands, they had great ideas and great inspiration. They just lacked the mainstream distribution. And so if you look back what happened 10, 15 years ago, we had an explosion of commerce. And we had the commoditization of commerce with Amazon, and then eBay. And those marketplaces created B2C distribution opportunities for people that didn't have it prior. When we approached the market, we said, there are tens of thousands of socially conscious brands out there that have inspiring products, amazing stories that people would buy if they knew about them. And so we need to create a platform that clearly breaks that open using technology, so we can build a model that is a build once, leverage many. And allows us to create compounding revenue while having a linear growth in overhead.
Well put. Sally, let's talk about Brent's grandmother here for a second. No, seriously. Do you agree with what he said, that basically today the technology is got to be even easier than it was in the past? And how does the whole design world sort of fit into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that you're seeing now is there's so many different technology offerings out there, and some of them are really, really human-centered, where they've identified a core need. So for example, Square, the core need is small businesses need a way to take credit card payments. And based on that core need, they've translated that into something that isn't complicated by too many external things. It's just doing that one thing well. And then I think you see a lot of other folks who are taking more of a scattershot approach of let's put a million things out there and see what resonates with people. Mm-hmm. But either way, there's definitely a trend of quicker iteration, quicker response to the marketplace, instead of build one thing and build it all the way out and then launch it and then see what happens.
Did anyone else want to comment on just the impact of technology? Obviously, in the enterprise space, you're seeing a completely different set of technologies. Anyone want to jump in on that?
What's interesting is, if you think about it, the proliferation of data is not just a trend anymore. It is an absolute reality staring us in the face. One statistic I read blew my mind. So 2011 or 2012, it didn't matter. We created more data in that year than the entire human history of mankind combined, including all languages, spoken, written, verbal, historical records, Mahabharata, Ramayana combined. I mean, you name it. It's like, wow. And then
Scary.
say, okay, where does this go next? So this is by 2020, which is a short 7 years away. For every person on the planet, man, woman, and child, we will create 2 megabytes or kilobytes? 2 kilobytes of data per second for every hour of every day in eternity. By comparison, the moon landing happened with a computer that had less than 640K of RAM. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And then you say, well, that's all great, but how do I know this makes any sense? And that's where 2 other trends come in. So you mentioned internet, mobility. Mm-hmm. I think cloud is going to change the way, it actually already has changed the way in a big way. And then you have hardware costs dropping, software innovation happening, that now allows you to dive into stuff that was mammoth, it was unthinkable. I'm working on a project with Stanford. They have 3 terabytes of data coming in literally every month. That is 30,000 gigabytes. And they're like, okay, what do we do with this thing? There's no physical computer that can solve this until now. And we can help hasten the innovation for drug therapies and approaches by a factor of exponential. The DNA sequencing, if I remember correctly, used to take months at a well-funded government lab until recently. The smart companies do it in 3 weeks. Our target is 20 minutes or less. And what that does for you is you go in a doctor's office, he takes a little clip of your hair or saliva swab and puts it on a little machine, and the actual computation happens in the cloud. So 20 minutes later, he says, okay, you got this problem, and the impact is, for example, 1/3 of all cancer treatments are not relevant to every patient. So at least you take away that 1/3, at least the 2/3 you can focus on. So there's real human impact right off the bat, and that is today. I mean, I can only imagine what will happen in 5 years. So, and this is there's a company in Germany that's doing just this. I forget the name now. But this is not just like some figment of a lab rat's imagination. This is reality. And
a lab rat's imagination.
And guys are making money off this, which is good. So, sorry, really long answer to your question.
No. Very good. Brandon.
So to follow up on that, those are great comments, and you're welcome for that computational power. But I think there's some interesting things in all of those statements and all of those examples, right? And we can look at them as, problems that we know and things we've been trying to solve, and it's getting better and faster and easier. But one of the things that we look at in terms of technology and the impact are what are the foundational cultural, social shifts that it's causing, right? What does it mean that all this data is being collected about us? And the World Economic Forum called data, personal data, the oil of the internet age and the currency of the digital economy, right? And so if there's a new resource that we're creating, that suggests perhaps a new economic system. And so maybe we can think beyond kind of doing the things that we know we need to do better, but what are the new economic systems that we can generate from this interaction of technology and data? Other examples of technology impacting at a very foundational level, humanity, right? Our notion of ownership, for example, has changed over the last years. We don't own music anymore, we license music. We don't have a physical object, it exists in the cloud. And those transitions start to shift the underlying fabric upon which our markets are based. And that's kind of the research and the application of science that I think needs to advance farther. How do we understand that a little more deeply and better so that our markets can adjust?
What's interesting about that example of music, I'm just thinking, is initially the technology changes, and then the business model changes. So Steve Jobs figures out how to go talk to all the Hollywood players and get music through the iPod. You get confused. Everything's an I these days. But then the behavior changes, as you point out. So it's technology first, business model shifts, overall human behavior changes. Nobody's actually mentioned communication technology, so I'll take that one on for a little bit. But it just seems to me, if we look at what we're carrying in our pockets, and we know this is going to get smaller, that it's just amazing. We're carrying a full computer on us, most of us, at this point. That in itself is incredible in terms of the impact it has on changing humanity. And a great example of this I've seen with Opportunity International, which I was very involved with for the last 12, 13 years. And you've got farmers in Africa now who have completely leapfrogged computing and are working on the computers in on their handhelds, and now have access to the same kinds of things that someone at MIT might. This is really an amazing world where the world's getting flatter because of these things. The other thing I'll say is design, and we're going to move on to design here for a second. Design's really a critical component of this, and I've been spending the last couple of weeks digging into what's happened with Google Glass and this whole wearable computing area, because I'm working on a startup in that space. And what I'm finding is that if you think about all of us walking around doing this, from a design perspective, makes no sense at all. So we know that the interface design has to dramatically change to keep up with where the size of the technology has gone. And maybe that's a good transition point to ask Sally about. So this whole area of design thinking that I think your company, IDEO, has been a driver for, you can apply it to almost any aspect of technology, but maybe you could share with us a couple of the example projects that you've worked on and things where they could get a sense of how design plays such a big role in how these technologies can impact people.
Sure. Sure. Well, I think, technology is in everything, right? But one of the areas where technology is really, really making a difference right now is in education. So there have been some great online learning platforms out there for a while, and now what we're seeing is this movement for schools to really integrate that into, like a K-12 school, to integrate it into the school day itself. And so one of the things that we've been working on is trying to figure out how to change, if you have a platform, there are so many great platforms out there like Khan Academy, which students can watch the videos, learn some lessons, and then they have a whole interface where they can practice different skills, work towards goals, achieve points, master different skills, and show their learning. Now, how do you build that into the classroom experience, and how do you make that an integrated part of the education that can then take the burden off of teachers, allow the teachers to focus on some of the harder to teach things like critical thinking and some of the more student-led initiatives, and then they're sharing that responsibility for the core skills with the online learning platform. So we've been working on things like that, where the technology itself needs to be compelling. It needs to be something that students will get engaged in, have autonomy, and be able to run with. But what's the whole model around that, and how do we make that fit within the school day, and really have each side, the in-person side and the technology side, inform and complement each other? The data from the technology helps the teacher create her lesson plan to make sure that she's really addressing the challenges students are having. Then she's able to pick the right additional exercises to exercise the skills she wants. And that's an example where I think the technology itself, maybe it's a core part of it, but then you have to design the different pieces around that.
And that almost sounds like another great example of how technology comes first, then the model around it changes, and then the behavior starts to change. And in a related area in higher ed, I've been spending some time looking at that, and Coursera and Udacity and some of these other startups in this space, basically the technology has enabled us to use video and do instruction in bite-sized components. Now you mix and match the bite-sized components, and anyone in the world with access to the technology now has access to the same education that you could get at Stanford, Brown, Harvard, UC Davis, whatever. And so that changes behavior. And the behavior we're probably going to see in that space that changes is that rather than have a university degree, you will have a collection of skills that you picked up through online courses and other things, and you'll be hired on the basis of that collection of skills, not on the piece of paper that you earned. So it's a major shift in technology, to the model changing, to the behavior changing.
And it's interesting because most schools have had the same model for 50+ years of you have a 45-minute class with one teacher and 30 students, and then you go on to your next subject and so on. And this allows you to really shake it up and think about class size and timing and schedule and everything really differently.
How about in the consumer space, design-wise?
So we're living in a design economy. And what I mean by design economy is that everything from the architecture of our site to how we curate our products to how we actually use the graphical user interface, it's all about the design. We are controlling an experience that we want our customers and members to feel. And so design is everything. And when it comes to technology, we use, so one of my co-founders was at PayPal for 9 years early on, doing UI UX, and then went on to co-found Genie.com, and then Yammer, and then a few others. And so he is a design expert. And one of the things that we're currently working on is a redesign of the user experience inside of the site so that you have a better experience, from architecture of what you see first to what you see when you get there to how you experience it to the types of products to the curation to how clean it is and how simple it is to navigate, and taking you down a path of navigation that you think is your choice but really is by design. And so I think in today's world, we have a litany of technological tools in front of us to control that. And when you start applying that beyond just consumer and into things like the educational world, which I'm also very passionate about, it becomes paradigm shifting, because that's a model that needs some innovation. So, yeah.
Anyone else on that topic? Impact of design?
Just a completely different example. What happens when there is no website? So think about, for example, there's 1 billion people in India. 50% of the world's poorest of the poor who live on less than $2 a day, half of those guys are in India. That's 500 million, more than the population of US, Canada, Mexico, Guatemala, everybody combined. That's a mammoth cohort. So the question is, how do you, from a impact social perspective, how do you get these guys up? So there's a guy who's selling widgets, balloons, bag of chips, cigarettes, a little kiosk, right? But the guy's working 20 hours a day, can barely eke out a living. And we at SAP have done some work and realized it's not because he's not working hard. There is no margin in his business. There's no profit. He sells a pack of cigarettes at a penny a pop, which is why in India, if you go, for example, you can buy cigarettes loose by the stick. because the labor is so cheap. The guy says, I'll give you one cigarette. Yeah, I'm not turning away anybody. You don't have to buy the whole pack from me. And he'll even light it for you. So he said, okay, well, how do you, and then you do the math and you realize from Procter & Gamble, who sells the bag of chips, down to the guy who peddles it on the street, there's 6 layers in the middle. Everybody's carving off their margin. Why? Because there's no technology to connect to the guy at the bottom. P&G says, I gotta have a vendor approval. You gotta be in my select group of vendors or distributors. They sell it to those guys. The guy says, I can only handle so many. If you wanna buy it, you gotta buy from that guy because you're not big enough for me. What we've done is we've got a project called Project Ganges where it's amazing and goes back to the design of the business process more than the UI because there is no UI. So a separate data set. There's 1 billion people in India. In 1991, which is whatever, 20 odd years ago, or 30 years ago, there were 7 phone lines per 1,000 people, just 7. Today we have 875. The vast majority, like a 95% ratio, is mobile phones. Now suddenly, everybody, pretty much everybody, their uncle has a mobile phone, if not 2. So now the poorest of the poor has a mobile phone. But it's not a smartphone like the Apple. It's an old-fashioned Nokia phone. How do you, from a design perspective, make his phone talk to the SAP system running at Procter & Gamble India so this guy can order 5 chips, 3 cigarette packs, 4 Coca-Cola bottles, and 10 bottles of Aquafina that he can then send his nephew on the next bus over to the nearest town, pick that merchandise consignment up, and sell them on the street the next day. And because he's cut out the middleman, he now makes 5 pennies more than he was making before. Suddenly, he's making a living wage. That is impact, sort of complete, incredible social impact. And that is happening live right now. It's actually, the project is underway. P&G signed up, Unilever signed up, a whole bunch of companies are getting onto the bandwagon.
Where does that push us? What happens 10 years down the road when bottom of the pyramid, so to speak, is got the same access to information and opportunity as top of the pyramid?
So I'm writing a blog about it right now. It's funny. And my theory is that, I know I'm going to say the S word, big data is making us all socialist in a very good way. You have the pyramid flattening down, and suddenly everybody has access to the same education, same technology. As a startup, you can get into the cloud for $100 a month and you have a website going. Amazon Web Services, $4 an hour, $1 an hour for most applications. And so what happens is you can present to the outside world the same image as a big company. The same angle applies to a poor guy. And I think that squeezing is going to create some massive social shift, in a way a good one. Because now you can actually say, where is the government's inefficient spending going? Take that out, redirect, and voila, everybody comes up. Now, the guy at the top who had his hegemony for the last 50 years ain't going to like it. But I think that's a change we all have to live through and deal with. But that's sort of my personal take on it. But
Brandon, any view on that? Because I know you're doing some big thinking with countries and areas of the world.
Right. I think my answer to your question of what to expect is I have no idea. And I don't think there's any way we can know, right? Because it's way too complex. And so I think the challenge that we have as a group of social innovators, as companies, is to do very similar to what Manju was talking about, right? Let's try to understand those factors and catalyze through technology, through social change, the things that we want to see and that will benefit people. One thing we do know, right? Disruption happens, and it always continuously happens. So the current business models that are driving communications and computing are going to be turned over at some point. And so how do we just make sure that we're doing that in a way that's socially responsible and creates business opportunities?
Now, it seems to me that the example of Egypt has got a lot of similarities to what you just talked about, but in that case, it was a political welling from the bottom of the pyramid, that those who weren't being heard, who were being marginalized, and everyone has the same, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, pyramid, so to speak. Egypt was a good example. But everyone's got the same set of information now, and now change occurs because of that. And then to use your example of big data, or in the case of channels, or channels of distribution, the case you use, same thing. Everyone's got access to democratized information, then the model is flipped or it shifts.
So, until a couple of years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, if you were a farmer in India and you wanted to take your crop and sell it to somebody, you had 2 choices. One, the government mandated minimum price, that was pretty much rock bottom, and you really couldn't make a living wage on that. Or you go to the marketplace, which was generally in every town, every village, but disconnected from the 150 miles over, and you talk to the local guy. The local guy could be a Tug, a Hoodlum, a Politica, who knows what, and he would say, I'm going to give you X rupees a kilo for your wheat. But the market rate's 5 rupees. The guy says, you want to buy it from me? You sell it to me or no? That's the only choice. Now what they've done is, on a mobile phone, the same old Nokia, old-fashioned mobile phone, they got a commodity spot exchange running. So every farmer, for like the top commodities in the country, can now get on his mobile phone, back to your design angle. Imagine being able to trade commodities and knowing the price, spot market price for wheat, rice, corn, whatever, by geography, by state, by zip code, and say, that's BS. The market rate is 20 rupees. Why are you giving me $5? Suddenly you clear out the inefficiency in the system. The guy at the bottom is happy, and the consumers are happy, and the government benefits too, because they get more tax revenues in. And once they can aggregate all these bazillions of transactions, they can actually say, where is all this money coming from? Who's selling at what point? Who's losing? How can we help the right farmer, sort of, things? I mean, just amazing elements of actual pragmatic impact at a very social level. And this is a private company. It's a public-private partnership that is doing it. So true social impact investing, if you will.
I think that the democratization of information in today's environment is so critical to kind of what everybody up here is doing and how information spreads. And if you talk about what happened in Egypt, to your examples, to access to information on where and how you shop, kind of in my world, how information spreads and people getting that information. I mean, that's kind of the name of the game. We boiled down the impact of what companies do into 140 characters or less so people can share it, right? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to allow people and empower them to share that impact quickly so it spreads, right? And the more people that know of it and the more pressure and dollars that we can actually drive to small, medium-sized social conscious brands, the more pressure it puts on the big brands to adjust, because Gen Y, they say 85% of Gen Y prefers to buy from brands that give back. That's a $200 billion cohort when you talk about annual purchasing power. And when you start to flex that spending power through democratization of information to the right types of brands, big brands take notice and they adjust.
Yeah, there's, democratization of X, like there's democratization of information. You can look at funding with things like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Kiva that just make the funding available at a much smaller level. We've got democratization of transportation lately with Uber and Lyft and Sidecar and all these, so that everybody who has a car can have their own small business. It feels like that's just every single category is going in that direction.
The Airbnb, everybody who has a house is now running a hotel. I mean, essentially.
Are you?
I actually went on the site and said, let me take a look at this animal called Airbnb. It was a little bit too tedious, and my house is pretty small, so and I got 2 noisy kids, so that would not have been a good combination.
I think this is really interesting in terms of that democratization and how technology is spreading and empowering other people. But I think it's also interesting to look at what's happening next, right? And how is value shifting just from the availability of data or the transparency of data to data analytics and real personal value creation through that data. So I think there's always a continued evolution of the technologies that make it more and more powerful for some users, even as the others are brought along. And it's being able to identify. One of the things we do is we try to map out that ecosystem to try to find out where are those really powerful new platform opportunities emerging in the space. And the Twitters, Facebook, eBays of the world is kind of done, right? So we know that the next big business isn't going to come in those domains. But by understanding these kind of transitions of democratization happening, and yet technologies continue to advance and values moving from just sheer performance to reliability to ease of use and personalization, that's where the next wave of value creation can come.
Great point. We have a question in the audience.
Hi. I find this really interesting. I certainly relate to your comment about how data is getting bigger and bigger. I mean, the capability. I mean, I was putting whole countries on the net for 9600 baud, a single 9600 baud connection. But I would suggest that the gap's actually getting bigger, not smaller. I spend a lot of time in developing countries, and less than 4% of India rural India accesses the internet. Less than 0.5% does it on a mobile device. When you're in the country, you realize that gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Less than half of India, less than a third of India has no electricity. 400 million people have no electricity. They couldn't even charge a mobile device if they had one. So well, what do we do about that? And how do we get designers and technologists here to start thinking about the realities of services that are designed for a BOP customer, especially in terms of cost? I mean, you're not going to get electricity for those people with a $300 smart meter. I mean, we're in the meter business, right? We have to hit a price point of $10. That doesn't mean putting megabytes of data in there. It means we have 4 kilobytes of program memory to work with to hit that kind of price point. Right? But designers in the West generally can't think in those kind of terms now. They're certainly not taught it in university.
I think the one point you raised, which at least what I took away, is what works in the Western world is not going to be replicatable wholesale in the developing world. And clearly, all your points about internet access, although it's 100 million people now, the numbers are rising. Mobility is a big issue, or is a big entry point for the internet usage. So a lot of guys who are on mobile phones may check cricket scores or may check their SMS messaging. Of course, happens all the time. But classical, I'm going to go on a website and surf, that's not happening as yet. But on the other hand, if you think about it, real estate is extremely expensive in a place like India. Think of Palo Alto for the whole country. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But people and labor is really cheap. So what happens to the consumer retail business? Nobody, and literally, unless your grandfather owned a shop or a storefront 50 years ago that he was paid for, you cannot make a dime on any retail business today. You have to sell gold or every commodity, the price of gold, to make any business out of it, which obviously you can't. So all the food and milk guys, the grocery guys wiped out, the clothing guys wiped out. Everything is going to the web. That's great. But now what happens? Labor is cheap, so the guy shows up at your house and says, I will deliver whatever you want because, heck, labor is so cheap, I need a job. Automation is happening, so if the technology can keep track of who has delivered what, but people are still hesitant to change. Nobody wants to give their credit card number because the maturity in the market hasn't happened, so people are paying cash on delivery. So now you have this delivery guy on a motorbike carrying a bunch of goods on a 3-wheeler or a tuk-tuk behind him, and he's got wads of cash. Interesting, social angle in terms of law enforcement, et cetera, et cetera. So all these things are absolutely, I mean, think of a billion people undergoing an economic revolution. That's what's happening right now. And then you add in healthcare. I mean, the nation actually has a plan right now, which is half completed. They're essentially, which would never happen in the US, never, ever. They're fingerprinting all 10, not just one, all 10 fingers and 2 iris scans for every citizen in the country. A billion people, give or take. Give or take is very important, and when you have a billion. But they've gone through 400 completed. And the implications are obvious. We live in a rough neighborhood, 5 countries with land borders that don't exist. I mean, you think Mexico border is bad in the US? Imagine Guatemala and Mexico, and times several thousand miles. And there is no resources of, sensors and automation and none of it, no high-speed thermal cameras and none of that stuff. So I'll give you an example, another very interesting one. So milk gets subsidized in lots of parts of India. And the government gives you a card. If you're a poor guy and you don't make so much money, we'll give you a card and you go take the card, and if you're a resident of this little colony, you get subsidized milk. Okay, sounds good. Well, I moved town, but the card is still valid. So I sell it to the next guy. What happens now is a very robust aftermarket in milk cards. Who would have thought? A little piece of card. And nobody bothers to check. It's still in Manju's name, but the guy who was offering it is Mr. Singh or Mr. somebody else. Doesn't matter. So now what they've done is, because they check this, the card is connected to your primary identification. When you show the ID, the guy pings it and says, this card is coming in the name of so-and-so, but Manju, you're not really Manju. So as a result, they basically stopped the wastage of government subsidy and refocused the dollars to be invested on supporting guys who really mattered. Again, a very small change in a nation full of problems, but this is the kind of place, I think, where technology has a massive role to play. And it's going to be evolutionary, it's going to take a while, but it's getting there.
I have a question for all of you, because this is a particular interest of the foundation I'm on the board of, and it fits in great with the interest that, because that there are problems, concrete problems in the developing world that need creative engineering solutions. And there's talent out there that can solve those problems, but how do you connect the engineering talent that exists with the specific problems that need solutions? And how do you see, from your perspective, what could be done to bring this talent to bear on these problems.
Sally, do you want to talk a little bit about IDEO.org? Because in a way that seems to address, even though that's more with design,
Yeah.
but design and engineering kind of in this similar world these
Yeah,
days.
absolutely. So IDEO.org is the sister organization of IDEO, and it's focused specifically on poverty alleviation. And so every project that IDEO.org is focusing on solving some of those fundamental problems, whether they're in emerging markets or in countries like the US. So it's really bringing those design skills and in many cases engineering skills to bear for these fundamental problems. Also to what you said earlier, I think the good news is there is a movement in universities to do more and more work at poverty alleviation, and I work at the D School. I teach at the D School, and we have a number of classes there, and it's a trend around the nation, something we'd like to see more of. But the student body of today is just totally fascinated by these types of challenges and really, really excited to focus, to work on design or to work on business or whatever their expertise is for these challenges. And the solutions that come out of it, I mean, I think when you're dealing with the constraints of emerging economies, often those are solutions that are actually applicable to the rest of the world. Mobile banking is the prime example where what's happened in Kenya and the Philippines has really led the world in what could happen for banking over mobile phones, banking for people who don't have traditional bank accounts, et cetera. You can look at telemedicine that's happening in India and other places where it's just really amplifying the impact that a few doctors can have to reach many, many people. So would love to see more of it, and that's something that we're working really hard on, but I think that there is a really good trend in that direction.
Are there other examples of?
I think some of the things that we can do, just some thoughts and suggestions that I've seen that I really like, is this idea of taking the engineering example of hackathons. Hackathons for social good, crowdsourcing the smartest brains out there, and applying their skill base and their knowledge base towards the social good problem in a concerted effort. That's something that I really would like to see more of. It's something that hopefully in the near future we're going to be able to help make more of those things happen.
I think there's an app for that too. I'm not being facetious. So at SAP we have an app called, I think it's called Charitra. Is that the one in Bangalore? So this is actually it's a much localized effort, but there's no reason it can't be scaled up. Where they say, so we have 3,500, 4,000 odd employees in SAP Bangalore. It's a pretty big facility.
Yeah.
And there's always tons of need for resources, people, engineering skills from all kinds of nonprofits working in India. Some people say I need 40 kilograms of wheat. Some guy says I need 3 developers to build a little website. I need a transportation help to deliver something to school kids. It could be any problem, but they're all over the map. And what this app does is it says, here's a problem, and SAP employees volunteer to solve the problem. Some dedicate engineering resources, some dedicated money, some dedicate their motor scooter and say sitting at home doing nothing, you can come pick it up for a few days. So it's all over the map, but the idea is fundamentally exactly as you said. And I think something like that could be certainly scaled up to be a lot more global in its nature.
And I think the other related component to that would be the universities. I teach at Berkeley, and I constantly have students saying, what project can I work on? And they're really, pretty bright there and all around the world. You've got access to a great labor pool, corporate and university.
And I think that's maybe one of the responsibilities we have as a foundation or as a company or an investor group is providing a strategic framework for which these type of experimental techniques can play out and can really add value. I was remembering Randy's note at the lunchtime keynote, right? And from the investor standpoint, what he said, if I'm paraphrasing, was, there's no penalty for taking a strike, right? And you can just wait for the perfect pitch. But I think there's a responsibility to at least establish a strike zone, right? To at least establish that strategic framework that we can say these are the type of experiments or the type of hackathons as great examples of mobilizing entrepreneurs in ways that can solve these systematic problems. My team at Intel is sponsoring a hackathon right now. It's actually going to be the largest hackathon ever. It's got 80 locations around the country, and it's in collaboration with over a dozen government agencies. And it's around this notion of big data, of open data sets combined with individuals' data, to try to create value for individuals in their communities, in their personal lives. And it started as just kind of this open data initiative, right? And so every government agency, not everyone, but the trend was for government agencies to say, hey, I'm the National Archives, help me do my job better. Give me more data, help me create visualization for my data. And so we're coming in trying to provide that leadership and say, well, that's awesome, but how do you allow that data to actually help somebody solve a problem in their daily life, right? How do we tune the challenge and provide that framework that allows them to create value as opposed to just do what they've already done better?
It seems like that's another example of what Sally pointed out, the democratization of X, where X is now the employees of a corporation. So it moves me into my next set of questions, which is this whole area of corporate social responsibility. I know we have someone in the audience who's also responsible for this at SAP. What, besides hackathons and .orgs, what else are you seeing or hearing about? And it seems like companies are beginning to step up to the plate, and you see a lot more corporate/entrepreneurship partnerships. You see a lot more corporate university partnerships, and it's all about sort of giving back from an impact point of view. What are you all seeing in your organizations? We've got some big ones, and you probably work with a number of big ones as well. So.
Yeah, from our angle, the last 5 years has been just a fundamental paradigm shift in the way that people are doing business, starting businesses, and supporting businesses. If you look at an entrepreneur like Blake Makowski, the founder of Tom's Shoes, and be what what it may about his actual impact in the local communities, his biggest impact in the world, in my opinion, is the generation of entrepreneurs that he proved that you can create a profitable business that also creates some social impact. If you talk to probably all of the entrepreneurs that we work with, the general nucleus is, oh, I saw Blake and I was really inspired by this business model and I wanted to create a X that does it better. And so when you couple in that the perfect storm of a generation of millennials, the Gen Y audience, 18 to 35-year-olds, that fundamentally believe inside of our DNA that we can change the world through business, we can change the world, and we're not going to take no for an answer. We were given a trophy our entire life, even if we finished last, and God damn it, we're going to continue doing what we're going to do.
Here's my trophy.
Right? It is this can-do attitude, very entrepreneurial spirit that has sparked this revolution we call kind of the renaissance of social entrepreneurship, especially heavily in the last 3 years. And when it comes to consumer spending behavior, that's really been the difference in this generation versus others, which is that this is now mainstream, and it's shifting the way that big businesses and small businesses alike are actually operating because consumers are demanding it.
By the way, how many in the audience are entrepreneurs? Okay, so a little more than half,
Quite a bit.
2/3. So welcome to the world, welcome to the year 2013, and I mean, entrepreneurship is everywhere. I went home last night, turned on the TV and watched Shark Tank. I mean, I can't get away from it. We're talking about term sheets on television. It's incredible. So you're living at a time, again, the technology is exciting time we're living in. Match that with the intersection of entrepreneurship and everything that we just talked about being flipped on its end, the way people do business, the business models, the way people are supporting entrepreneurs, the fundraising model of crowdsourcing, et cetera. Before we go to the audience for another question, any other comments on what we were just talking about here, this corporate social responsibility area?
You know, we've done a slightly different angle on core CSR.
Okay.
So my colleague Nico here, she does core traditional CSR, if you will. What we do is slightly different. We say there's a platform we are selling for a lot of money to our corporate customers. And that platform has a lot of capability that can be deployed for the non-commercial, non-profit sector. How do we get that and blend that with what CSR is doing? So we do sort of think of sustainability meets CSR meets good old-fashioned platform marketing. And that's what I do. And all we say is, listen, we have this capability. If you have a problem, and if you have massive data sets you're struggling to deal with, talk to us. We'll give you technology for free in the cloud. We'll give you technical resources. We actually work with another nonprofit that Nico is on point for we bring in school kids. Because our philosophy is if you don't raise the next generation of kids in this country and any other country on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, we're going to lose the battle. So,
STEAM is you add the A for arts.
Oh, really? Okay. We're still
That's the news. I didn't make that up.
I'm still in the STEM zone,
Picking
man.
up.
I barely picked up STEM. And so what we do is you bring in high school kids, map them or align them with the data scientists that either we provide or find from somewhere else, and then we go to work at the problem. And the problems can be, we just concluded a project literally last week where we took a look at 10 years of crime history of city of San Francisco. And we married that data with all kinds of additional data sets. Graffiti, location of liquor stores, presence of police stations, demographic information, rental prices, presence of those CROs, you call them, the temporary housing units where people live, poor people live basically. And there was like 3 million points and combinations. We went to work on HANA, got the information out, and there's some pretty amazing insights that we're now sharing with the Sheriff's Office to say, here's what we stumbled on. You may want to change the way your police cars patrol the neighborhood, or crime happens this time of day. So one of the things was, if there's a Giants home game that we lose, and the weather is 50 degrees and the fog's rolling in, and you're walking after the park, and you are in an area that has a liquor store in less than a mile, and there's graffiti on the wall, and the light bulb is broken on the street lamp, the possibility of bad things happening to you looks like this. From a stolen bicycle all the way to assault and homicide, you can map that out mathematically. But being able to do this in a way that has public policy impact, that is amazing. To do it for free, that's freaking awesome. Why wouldn't you sign up? So I have the city of Boston that's doing the same thing. They've actually done something pretty interesting. They said every citizen who has a mobile phone, download this app. It's called, I forget, Boston something or the other. What that does is, if you see anything that's a problem with the city, a pothole, graffiti, what have you, you take a photo. Take a photo and one button and the thing goes. What it does is it sends the geo-coordinates and sends it to the right department whose job it is to fix that. Not only that, you can come back the next day, click on the same link and see what happened. Come back a week later, and then they have a dashboard, which is live real time, obviously, and you can track to see how many of these things are getting fixed. Citizen engagement has acquired a new domain completely. This was unthinkable even 2 years ago, but all thanks to the cloud, mobility, new technologies, design. Super critical in this whole process. So it's changing the way which I still believe we're getting more socialist. I know people may not like the term, but it's making us think and behave better so that everybody can benefit.
Great example. And I was with you on every aspect of that, except for the Giants home game that we lose.
I know.
I'm not buying into that one.
I know.
But Brandon, did you have something?
I was going to comment on. We think of it actually as one of those foundational transitions that's happening, one of a traditional notion of consumer and producer to one of participation, right? And whether that's through funding or through product creation, or through our data sets, or through our causes that we're participating in. It's something that's foundational, right? And we talk about big data, and what's interesting to me about the way that data is going, there's an example of a company I like to use called Asmopolis. Anybody familiar with that? Asmopolis, Asthmapolis City. And it's simply a GPS reader on an inhaler, and when an asthmatic has asthma attack, they depress their inhaler, it dispenses the medication, but also logs their location. And they contribute that data with everybody else who's participating into a map of a local, regional location of where people are having trouble. And so I can make better decisions based on my own participation, right? It's very similar to taking the photo.
This is huge. It's like one of those things like, why did I think of that one? It's pretty amazing.
It's neuro-sneezing or something like that.
So we call this everyday entrepreneurship, right? It's the notion of entrepreneurship. How do we empower everybody to be an entrepreneur and can participate in ways that they find valuable to themselves or communities? And that's definitely a technology play. It's a technology play, but it's also, I think it's shifting the perspective that large organizations, government organizations, companies have in terms of what they're trying to create.
Yeah, and it's shifting the perspective from an employee's point of view. So when you're coming out of school, and typically you're faced with, do I want to do something in a smaller company? Do I want to work for a larger company? That's one of the big challenges my students at Berkeley are constantly coming to me with. But you can now imagine someone going to a larger company and actually getting to engage in projects like the ones that you're talking about, and actually maybe being excited because the organization, whether it's SAP or Salesforce or IDEO or Intel, is allowing their, or Google, which has that 20%, you get to take 20% of your job as an engineer and apply it to something you're passionate about. It may not have to do with your exact job. So all of these organizations, from a corporate point of view, are enabling people to have more aligned lives. So they want to make impact. That doesn't mean they have to go create a company to make impact. It could mean they join a larger organization. They can still have an outlet for the impact. Now, it doesn't take away from any of you entrepreneurs. Keep doing what you're doing. Do not join big companies. Keep doing what you're doing.
If I may just add to Brandon's point,
Yep.
the whole notion of data coming from now, not just people, but sensors. So in fact, what he's doing is when the guy is pressing the inhaler, there's an automatic machine that's releasing some data into the cloud. But now you have millions and bazillions of these sensors. So I was talking to the guys in Louisiana. So when Katrina happened and flooding happened in New Orleans, they built, I think, 19 or 20 miles of levees at a cost of multiple billions. But one thing really smart, they embedded a sensor every 100 feet that tracks 24/7 all kinds of parameters, humidity, wave pressure, sunlight hours, all kinds of stuff. That is all sitting in the cloud. And now they're saying, we'll take that, put Google Earth on it, and say, if the next hurricane of category X strikes, and the wind direction is so and so, here's where the flooding is going to happen. Therefore, we will stop building from even happening in these neighborhoods, and the evacuation plan completely changes for the other neighborhoods. And you multiply this kind of scenario because there are sensors everywhere, and you have this sort of machine economy beyond the digital economy, if you will, or the design economy, where you have, I mean, it changes, at least I can't even grok the mammoth nature of that transition.
How many are familiar with the term the Internet of Things? Have you read about that? So that's a trend we haven't talked about, but that's essentially what you're talking about, which is we have very inexpensive technology which can be deployed atmospherically to products that are making their way through the supply chain. I mean, you can think of dozens and dozens of examples, and that we're already there. There are many startups working on Internet of Things type activities, but 5-10 years from now, I think it won't even be a special category. It'll be integrated into what we do. So it's a way of knowing about your environment, no matter where you are. Okay, I wanted to, so we had a number of questions. Bonnie, before you go, this gentleman right behind you has patiently been waving his hand.
Actually, kind of what you were talking about before about the technology part, and then technology, business model, social change.
Yeah.
And then you brought the entrepreneur piece in. My experience is very similar to what Mitra talked about earlier, in that getting social impact investors versus technology investors, and probably, Brent, you could speak to this, like, who funded your tech company?
Yeah.
Is it technology investors or social impact investors? Because my experience is, again, social impact investors don't understand technology. I have a company very similar to yours. I'm actually helping distribute media.
Oh, nice.
And so I have a double whammy because it's not only, it's an intangible product.
Right.
The social impact space seems very fixed on tangible goods. And so if you guys can speak to how do you get investment to take this technology into new business models that can then further this to the next level and create that next cycle?
I think it's a very timely and great question. So I've been in the social enterprise space for almost 5 years, 4.5, and it has matured a lot from the investment side over in that time frame. However, the big however, I have always found myself in a gap of not building wells on the ground in Africa type of impact, but not creating the next Google algorithm technology. Very much in the middle of, we are a for-profit business, technology company, designated to creating social change while making a profit. And it has been a challenge over the years to find the right set of investors. We've turned down term sheets. We have, because of moral issues with how the terms were set up. We've gone through a host of different angel investors that some were a good fit and some weren't. Ultimately, the difference maker for us very early on, and actually how I know Randy was a gentleman who was the 13th employee at Google, who I had a chance encounter with through a network. Hounded him for about 3 months to get a 15-minute coffee. I live in Los Angeles, and I told him, hey, I'm going to be in San Francisco on this day. I wasn't. I'll meet you, I'll meet you for coffee. And he's okay, 15 minutes. It turned into 3 hours. Good play. Yeah, hustle. And so it turned into 3 hours, and he led our first angel round. And he believed in me, in our vision to solve this distribution challenge through technology. And it wasn't all easy going after that. It wasn't like, oh, that was the snowball. We had to continuously hustle. What we're seeing now is that there's a convergence, similar to how we saw a convergence of the for-profit and nonprofit world in the last few years into this for-purpose world. We're seeing that slowly happen with investors. You see people like Randy with Kleiner talking about this, and the VCs kind of coming around, because ultimately this is a consumer-driven paradigm shift, and when that happens and businesses start to really change, there is a lot of money to be made in this segment, and investors will follow that. So, my advice is just, it's massive networking. It is talking to people about your shared vision, showing how it's going to be profitable, knowing your audience. My pitch to a impact investor has different talking points about our story than it does to a traditional VC. But it's all the same story. We're the same company. We teach social enterprise to low-income kids in Los Angeles. It's one of my favorite things that we do. It's the Roost.org side of the business. I don't even talk about that when I go out to the traditional VCs. And so it's just kind of a matter of knowing the audience. The good news is this, and this is kind of what I'll leave you with. There's more and more capital flooding into this market. We're at Investor Circle, clearly. And there's more and more angels, and there's more and more VCs. I think VCs are a little bit traditionally slower on that, but we're starting to see the social enterprise space from a for-profit, for-purpose angle get a lot more capital flow to it.
And if I could just add to that, since I know a lot about this area and use it in my teaching at Berkeley, the reason the VC market is slow is they have other motivations. Right. The motivations typically for a venture firm come from pension funds, universities, and they are looking for a return. They were not putting their money into that venture firm for the purpose of social impact. So you have to go back to the roots of where is the money going in. And Bonnie and her team here have led sessions on this, actually, with groups of venture firms. So you have new forms of venture firms where the source of the money is interested in social impact, and that's emerging. And once we have that, you'll see a lot more venture firms in there, because their motivation is aligned with the social entrepreneur then.
The one thing I'll go beyond that just a little bit is that what we really teach to our kids, our high school kids, and what we believe in the companies we work with is about building in your cause into the cost of goods sold, into the DNA of the business, so that it can't be stripped out no matter what. It is not an afterthought, it's a forethought. And that I really strongly believe, it doesn't matter if you're a for-profit, a nonprofit, or B corporation, using the power of a business model and how you're going to generate returns will speak to any investor.
Nicole, did you want to add something?
It's a question and a comment, I guess, combined about the role of technology for an entrepreneur or a smaller company in actually scaling your company. So not looking at technology as an application and what you can do with it, or the big data aspect, but we just recently launched new efforts, and it does fall into the traditional CSR area at SAP. But it is fairly strategic in that we've looked at where we really have an intersection with our own business. We're a software company. SAP provides business software. So we've tried to see where we can find interesting business models in emerging markets that both have a business and a social impact, and work with those companies to help them at a much earlier stage than we usually invest in them from a ventures perspective or from another big data perspective. And work with them at an early stage to see where enterprise technology can come in. Is there a way that you can maybe manage your resources internally at an early stage, not necessarily having to have these end-to-end applications immediately? So what we found is that, yes, we're a large corporation, but we're a group within that large corporation that can almost build a pipeline for ourselves, and in that process help smaller businesses grow in a sustainable and responsible manner. And that's become the new focus for us for corporate responsibility. And I'm wondering from your perspective, being, you know, and I know there are a lot of entrepreneurs in the room, but maybe from your perspective with Roots, like at what point do you think that's an important conversation to have, or for you as a company to start thinking about?
So it's a really important conversation, because I think the earlier you can get at companies in embedding this, as I said, as a forethought rather than afterthought, the more sustainable and lasting the impact. You know, as an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, any entrepreneur, it's all about listening to the market, not telling the market what the solution is, but listening and creating something and adapting and pivoting to what really is solving that problem. And when you, a company like SAP, kind of investing in social problems and entrepreneurs in the early stages, that's usually the hardest time for entrepreneurs to scale. Access to capital is the biggest barrier to entry for any entrepreneur, and especially a social entrepreneur. The next one after that is distribution, right? Access to customers. And oftentimes those come hand in hand. And so, you know, for us, we look at it in a very holistic standpoint and say, well, how can we help the ecosystem? How do we start from our teaching program and like you were saying, educating the next generation of entrepreneurs to go change the world through business, all the way through an incubation program of some of the brands that we work with that have incredibly high growth potential and incredibly smart entrepreneurs that are passionate but also business savvy, investing time and incubating them, to helping on just the distribution side. We've been on the Today Show 2 or 3 times and getting our brands into that kind of mainstream press all the way through is kind of our approach. Now we divide up our time. Bandwidth is our best resource, but we divide up our time accordingly based on where we think we're going to have the most impact. And for us right now, the biggest initiative is building out the Roost.org social enterprise teaching platform, and that's kind of where we're focusing a lot of our energies, getting them early.
Which is, if you really think about using as an entrepreneur a large company, it is, as an entrepreneur, you provide innovation back into very large companies who become too big and who think they're too big to fail. But by working with entrepreneurs, we're starting to see that a company like SAP isn't either. We just bought a cloud business, and on-demand business, and we're seeing that, yes, it's a great market and it's a good segment, but entrepreneurs are the ones that need to tell us and to show how you actually do that in the right way. Yep. So we're using design thinking. We're running design thinking workshops with entrepreneurs at SAP.
Smart.
And they're showing us what needs to happen. We provide our solutions because we have a huge SME market, right? We don't know how to sell as well as a small business because everyone knows that SAP is the big enterprise company. So how do we do that in a meaningful way? So in a way, entrepreneurs are showing us that innovation.
Absolutely.
Side.
That's great.
And
That's great.
become an army of intrapreneurs.
Yep.
So we have 65,000 employees across the world, in any country you can imagine. So mobilize those, use those. So the core function of CSR doesn't become about writing grants and checks anymore. The core function of CSR in today's world, if we do it the right way, is by using those people and mobilizing them to work with great companies like yourself.
Thank you. So, the analogy I use for that, because we talk about this all the time, is that big corporations are like a big tanker ship in the ocean. In order to turn around, it takes 10 miles. They got to talk to the brig and the captain, and then they all got to get ready to turn. And then when they finally turn, it's taking them another 10 miles. Right. The entrepreneurs in the speedboat saying, "Fuck that, let's turn."
So what I like about this conversation is that it's emblematic of the grand experiment that's going on, right? And so I'm gonna disagree with Randy just on principle, just not necessarily
why not?
Disagree, but just why not? That there's this evolution from technology to the business model to the behavior, and I think actually it's not nearly that linear. And there's a combination of all of these things, and I guarantee you have competitors, right, Randy, and they're transversing this competitive landscape in a different way, right?
Of course.
And so there's this experiment going on, right? And you talked about SAP using those entrepreneurs as a way for you to understand that grand experiment. And as the need for social responsibility changes the viability of a business model, then some companies will be more successful than others. And then as technology comes into play, those who are on that trajectory will become more successful in terms of their business model. So it's like a big sheet with a bowling ball on it, right? And you're starting to change the corners, and the viable businesses are shifting according to that infrastructure, or that fabric underneath. And so I think it's just really interesting that the social responsibility piece, I think we have to keep in mind, is a factor that will become more or less positive in terms of the viable business models that it can support, and we need to design for that, coming back to the design thinking.
Excellent. Bonnie, you had a question.
Yeah, this is fascinating. And there's a couple different things at work here. On the one hand, this data is allowing us to, you said maybe we're all becoming socialists. I would say maybe we're just becoming real capitalists to the extent that an efficient market is one where everyone has the equal access to information. So that's happening. But yet there is this difference between access to this technology. And then it's changing so fast. I'm a very fortunate, developed world educated person, and I'm not, I'm not an early adopter. And so, and I'm trying to, hence I'm so glad you're here, I'm here to learn this. But yet, so while these technologies could draw this down, then those who understand can control and have access to this data and manage it gain an even bigger benefit. So how do you make sure that this is all moving the right way? Or is it, we have this wealth disparity increasing, and then the STEM education is that, are we getting that out there? How do you make sure this happens? I mean, this is happening so quickly. And 2 years ago, we didn't, the amount of data, and all of a sudden, boom. And so how can possibly people that are so far behind in their access catch up and have those same benefits? I'm just seeing these two different forces at work. How do we make sure that it doesn't drive the disparity even greater?
In Skyfall, I don't know if you guys remember the movie, the James Bond one. Yeah. The new Q, the young guy, he says to the old Bond, I do more damage in my jammies before 7 a.m. than you do in an entire mission. And that is exactly the same point. He's the computer guy, the evil genius, if you will, and he creates havoc with all kinds of issues that he does using his fingers, versus old man Bond, going around shooting with his Walther PPK. And I think that is very emblematic of where we are. I don't know what the answer is, but my guess is that at some point everybody will have to collectively bootstrap and say, and that's where the capitalistic Darwinian scope of things gets in, that you realize this is the skill set needed to succeed in the 21st century. If you don't have it, individuals, organizations, and by extension nations will be on the losing end. And therefore, if a place like India or China can do fantastic things in educating their people, India, for example, 50% of the population is below 30 years of age. Well, that's mammoth. And okay, but you only have 30 more years before they become old. So if you don't fix your systemic issues in the next 3 or 4 decades tops, you will have a really old population and no replacement because you want to bring the billion down to less. Now how do you compete in the world? And so not only education, but its impact on infrastructure, public policy, transparency, all those things become really critical. Don't know, but I think it's going to be a challenge for everybody going forward, which is why I think education is so important. I was on the Unreasonable at Sea cruise, I guess, or the voyage last week. And there were 700 kids on board on that ship. I personally met maybe 50, 60 of them just in passing. To the 100%, they were all liberal arts majors from very nice, expensive colleges. William and Mary, Middlebury College, Bowdoin, all kinds of names are on their sweatshirts.
I'm glad you didn't say Brown.
And I asked one of them, I said, so how do you propose to make a living when you graduate? And they all had this really fuzzy sort of response. And that's when the STEM thing struck me, that, if you're competing with a guy who's on the other side of the world, but he can build a better mousetrap, companies will go looking for that guy. He doesn't have to have, like somebody was saying, you got the right skills in place. It doesn't matter what his degree is from. And that sort of, in essence, boils down to what you're saying, because if you don't build and train for the next skill set, we'll all be reading Shakespeare for no real good reason, besides it's good to read, now what?
And I thought that's what we were doing.
It's still very relevant.
I'm sure somebody has a...
So I think the point you bring up is a really good one, and I don't know the answer to this disparity, but one thing that I think is really cool to notice is that when people finally do get that technology, they're not really behind for long. The learning curve is so steep. I mean, a teenager who doesn't speak English will get an English cell phone and very quickly figure out how to make it work for them. So the disparity exists, but I think it fixes itself once people get access.
And good design technology can help that learning.
Yeah.
You know, there was an experiment, I don't know if you guys, it's a few years old, maybe 4 or 5. The founder of India's largest outsourcing company, Infosys, or at that point the largest, real nice guy, he said, let's do an experiment. So he put a basic PC with a keyboard into a brick wall of his office perimeter, the compound wall, where there was lots of slums adjoining it, which is typical in the developing world, expensive office buildings next to a slum area. And you had all these street urchins with zero education, her mom and dad, who were basically doing menial jobs, barely eking out a living. He said, let me see what these kids can do with a computer. They've never seen a computer, let alone touch one. And lo and behold, he found they were actually advancing so quickly in less than a week. These kids were on there playing, writing, not quite writing mails, but watching videos, playing games, doing all kinds of things that he said, we behind the walls would never have imagined, because these kids didn't have the technical, practical training. But the learning curve was, and this is 5 years ago, so presumably it's even shorter now.
We have a question right back here.
So thank you for being socialistic, capitalist, technology geeks.
And democratic. And democratic.
System thinking, meta thinkers. So I just want to acknowledge how glad I am in this conversation. So I've had a number of discussions around some of the themes that I'm hearing today that are really provoking me to try to bring some conversations to bear around the opportunity. And the best way to convey this, maybe what we all have in common in this room, is we're all in this conference trying to accomplish connecting capital to entrepreneurship for a better, what we have in common, the larger world. And take, for example, that same kind of thought around a regional economy around a city, or all the people on a reasonable boat, or what have you. But there's myriad forms of collaboration that require many, 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 many data inputs and many points of collaboration where everyone is wearing 10 hats and we're all connecting in complex myriad ways. So then that you understand the general direction that we can think it. I know that software can do it, but it has not been done. LinkedIn is like the phase 1 of 7 phases to make this happen. Podio plus Basecamp plus LinkedIn plus connecting the dots plus due diligence online are all pieces. But if we put all of that together, we got something like what we're talking about. And I've heard several people saying that they have found the Holy Grail conceptually, and they're working on it now in isolation. Yet by design, it has to be done in collaboration with everyone working on a new set of standards rather than a new set of software that is my software versus yours to do the same thing. Did I explain myself clear enough? So the question is, if you get what I asked, what is going on like this that we can tie these things together? What do you know of in these kinds of situations so we can actually make this happen? Please, I'd like to hear your thoughts so we can actually start this conversation and get this done in the next few years.
Well, I'll start. I think you're absolutely right? And I would suggest that a lot of those tools weren't really meant to do what you're asking them to do.
Well, of course, but that's why we have to design a new tool set,
right.
A tool standard,
right.
than a new tool. Because that's the issue. It's not a tool, it's a system of collaboration and a new mimetic, internet that enables us to connect more effectively around microeconomies. Right,
and I think it's more than just even that consistent set of standards and softwares, right? I think there's a lot of hard work actually in for people to come up with ways, both in terms of understand what the problems are as well as to contribute. We did a small project that's similar to what you discussed, and it's around the data space. And so we asked the question based on a bunch of the ethnographic work and business work that we did, what would it mean for individuals to be empowered through their own personal data to participate in new ways in economic sense? And we didn't have that skill set or that knowledge base within our company, and so we crowdsourced it. And we built a tool that allowed people not to just list all the factors factors that would be necessary for this new economic system to emerge, but how they were all related. So does factor A impact factor B, and is it up or down? And we mapped this complex network in a very crowdsourced way. And then the hard work is to do the analysis that allows you to understand where the catalytic points are, where are the points of influence within this very complex network, that if you focus your investment, your energy, your time, the standards, whatever that focus might be, in these 4 areas, then the rest of the system could be catalyzed and emerge. So it's hard, is I think my point. We did it on a small scale. If you're interested, it's at wethedata.org. It's open research, open data, open participation still. You can collaborate. But it's hard work. I think that's maybe not your answer. It's an affirmation of your problem statement.
About the fact that it's hard. I mean, that's why we're talking about it in this room, because we're willing to take that question on. Regardless of its difficulty, what are we going to do about this?
You know, there's a sharing platform for the nonprofit world. And somebody sent me a link like 3 days ago, and it completely eludes me right now. But what it really is at the very basic foundational level, it's a community news group where you can talk about stuff, share things, pretty basic. And then it goes from there in terms of the tools available, in terms of initiatives other companies are doing, in terms of inventions other guys are doing, all centered around the idea of social innovation. And I thought it was kind of silly. I'm like, yeah, it's a job board or it's a community board. What's the big deal? But as I began digging into it, you realize it's actually a very nice, clean way for people to share things. Now, obviously, the underlying assumption is somebody wants to share. Because if that guy is building that big widget, combining all those 7 things together, and he wants to do it by himself, you can't make him share. But what this is, if you're looking for information specifically around the social innovation, social impact space, that was the place to be. And I'll dig up the link and send it to maybe somebody. Excuse me. Completely forget it now.
The name, yeah. Okay, we have time for one more question. Does anyone have a killer question that they want to end with?
No pressure.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me wrap up by, well, actually, let's have you guys wrap up. What did you think of this conversation? And I mean, we ran the gamut here. We talked about different kinds of technologies. We talked about the impact of technology. We talked about paradigm shifts. We talked about design economy, the 2 of you here. We talked about reshaping of entrepreneurship, which is why a lot of you are here today. And we talked about how funding and the sources of funding are being changed even by technology. Any last thoughts that you want to contribute before we wrap up?
So this is my first time to Investor Circle, so I don't know what you do next. But to the last question's point, the conversation is
by the way, the music comes on and we all dance. Is what's going to happen. I'm serious.
Sorry. But I think it's what do we do next, right? What is this forum and other forums? What do you do, right, with this conversation and with this information? And I think that's the big challenge. I think that's
what's the takeaway here.
Not the takeaway. What do we do? If this is a community who's going to take action, what do we do? And I think that's where the hard work needs to. This is the beginning of the hard work.
Good point. Anyone have any answers to that? What do we do? Yes.
I mean, it just sounds to me that what everyone is talking about is we welcome or some collaborative solutions that will allow people who want to work on problems that are out there, often problems that have technical solutions that require engineers, designers to somehow meet the people who have problems that could benefit from their knowledge and expertise and collaborate together. In what shape that might take, I don't have an answer to, but it seems like from what everyone's saying in the audience and here, that would be a welcome presence in the world on all ends.
The unique thing about our industry is that it's so collaborative. No other industry in the world is as collaborative as the social enterprise community, and I think you can take some, great excitement in that, specifically with regards to what you were talking about earlier with your question around there's big problems we solve and there's no, how do we get at the solution or help to get to it? I think it's just a matter of talking to the peers in this room and letting them know, hey, here's what we're looking for, this is what we need, who do you know, what if, how would you solve this? And just starting those conversations, because one of my favorite quotes from one of my mentors was that your network is your net worth. And I think that's really true in this room.
Well, on that note, we thank all of you collaborators for coming, and I want to thank the panel very much for all their wonderful talks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Randy.
Yeah, thanks, Randy.
Thank you, Investor Circle.